Welcome to the upper digestive system. Today's tutorial will review the general histology of the digestive system, then focus on the normal histology of the esophagus as related to its function, and finish with a brief foray into some common esophageal pathologies. I'm Dr. Catherine Moore, and I'm the Histology Wizard. Although we often study each segment of the digestive tract separately, the segments of course do not function independently. Except for the oral cavity, the digestive tube has a uniform histological organization. And this organization is characterized by distinct and significant structural variations that reflect the regional changes in function. This cartoon illustrates that the GI tract is a hollow tube with a lumen that can vary in diameter, and the wall is made up of four main layers: the mucosa, the submucosa, the Muscularis Externa, and the Serosa or Adventitia. This H&E section is taken from the body of the stomach, but it gives a good overview of the four layers. We'll walk through the organization of each layer, beginning with the mucosa. The mucosa consists of three sublayers. First, an epithelium that varies between regions of the gut tube depending on function. This epithelium often invaginates to form glands extending into the lamina propria, which increase the secretory capacity. The next sublayer is the underlying lamina propria, which is easier to see in some regions than in others. The lamina propria consists of loose connective tissue and is rich in blood vessels, lymphatics, lymphocytes, smooth muscle cells, and it often contains small glands. In the intestines, the lamina propria is a relevant site of immune responses. And in some regions, the mucosa extends into the lumen as finger-like projections or villi, which increase the absorptive capacity of the digestive tube. The last sublayer of the mucosa is the muscularis mucosa, a thin layer of smooth muscle. This sublayer separates the mucosa from the submucosa. It also controls local movements of the mucosa. The next layer is the submucosa. This layer contains dense irregular connective tissue, large blood vessels, and nerves branching into the mucosa and muscularis. Glands are present in the submucosa of some regions of the digestive tract, such as the esophagus and duodenum. In the stomach and small intestine, the submucosa also forms folds called rugae and plica circulare, respectively, which extend into the lumen to increase surface area. The submucosa also contains the Meissner plexus of autonomic nerves, and these in part control the smooth muscle activity of the muscularis mucosa. The third layer of the digestive tube is the muscularis externa. This thick layer is composed of smooth muscle cells that are organized as two or more sublayers: an inner circular layer whose fibers are arranged around the tube, and an outer longitudinal layer whose fibers are disposed along the tube. Thus, contraction of the inner layer reduces the lumen, think squeezing a tube of toothpaste, while contraction of the outer layer shortens the tube, think pushing the toothpaste tube from the bottom. There can be skeletal muscle fibers in the muscularis externa, but only in the pharynx, the upper part of the esophagus, as we'll see shortly, and the anal sphincter. The muscularis also contains the enteric plexus or oberux plexus, and this is formed from many autonomic neurons aggregated into ganglia. These plexi are found between the two layers of muscle and regulate the motility of the muscularis. Together with Meissner's plexus, these compose the enteric nervous system. Finally, we have the serosa or adventitia. The serosa is a thin layer of connective tissue as seen here in the stomach. This layer contains lymphatics, blood vessels, and sometimes adipose tissue. It is covered by a layer of mesothelium which secretes fluid. The serosa covers the parts of the digestive system that are suspended in cavities, and it's continuous with the mesenteries, which are continuous with the peritoneum, the serous membrane lining the abdominal cavity. In the regions of the digestive tract that are not suspended in cavities but are bound to adjacent structures, such as the esophagus, the serosa is replaced by an adventitia, a thicker connective tissue layer that merges with the adjacent tissue and lacks mesothelium. Some organs can have both a serosa and an adventitia in different parts. Here are two different examples. On the left, we see a thin serosa, while on the right, in the esophagus, you can see the thicker adventitial layer. Now that we have the four layers down, we'll begin to look at the different regions of the digestive tube, focusing on the regional characteristics of the layers as related to specific functions. We'll begin at the top of the digestive tube in the esophagus, where the four layers first become well established. The esophagus is a muscular tube which transports swallowed material from the pharynx to the stomach. This material is propelled by the two layers of the Muscularis Externa, which we will describe shortly. In this H&E stained section, you can easily distinguish the layers and sublayers of the esophagus. First, you see the mucosa with its epithelium, lamina propria, and muscularis mucosa. Next, we see the submucosa and the two layers of the Muscularis Externa. The esophagus is bound to adjacent structures, so it contains an adventitial layer rather than a serosa, although that's not well shown here. If we look at a little higher magnification, we observe that the esophageal mucosa has a non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, a thick lamina propria, and a smooth muscle layer of the muscularis mucosa. The submucosa contains mucus-secreting glands, the esophageal glands, which lubricate and protect the mucosa. The presence of these glands will help you distinguish vagina from esophagus in histological sections. Nearer the stomach, the submucosa may also contain glands which secrete additional mucus to help propel the bolus into the stomach. The muscularis externa of the esophagus contains two layers of muscle, but the composition differs throughout the length of the tube. Swallowing begins with voluntary muscle action, so the top third of the muscularis contains exclusively skeletal muscle, much like the tongue. The middle has a combination of skeletal and smooth muscle. The image here reflects an area in the middle where you can see both the smooth and skeletal muscle, and the image on the right shows an increased magnification and a longitudinal section where you can easily note the differences in the two muscle types. The peripheral nuclei and the striations of the skeletal muscle can be compared to the S-shaped central nuclei of the smooth muscle. The lower third of the muscularis contains all smooth muscle, since at this point the bolus is moving under involuntary control by peristalsis. Peristalsis occurs by the alternating constriction of the smooth muscle layers. The contraction of the inner layer occurs behind the bolus, decreasing the lumen, and at the same time the outer layer is relaxing in front of the bolus, increasing the length so that the bolus moves forward. This sequence repeats with the layers alternating, contracting, and relaxing. The longitudinal layer provides the directionality so that the bolus always moves forward. As my colleague Dr. David Morton describes it, think of a tube of toothpaste. To get the toothpaste out, you squeezy, just like the inner circular layer, and next you pushy from the bottom, just like the longitudinal layer, ensuring that the toothpaste moves towards your awaiting toothbrush. The esophagus opens into the stomach. The movement of the bolus into the stomach is controlled by the lower esophageal sphincter. This sphincter and the upper esophageal sphincter are not recognizable anatomical structures, but are considered functional sphincters. The lower sphincter opens or relaxes to let food into the stomach and closes to keep stomach acid from entering the esophagus. Thus, the failure of this sphincter allows stomach acid to enter the esophagus, and since the esophageal mucus isn't enough to protect the epithelium, this causes pain, which is known as heartburn. At the junction between the esophagus and the upper region of the stomach, the cardia, the epithelium transitions from non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium to the simple columnar epithelium of the stomach. Repeated damage to the esophagus can lead to inflammation and esophagitis. Often this inflammation involves the abnormal appearance of eosinophils in the esophageal mucosa, and this condition can result from a chronic allergic or immune condition. Acid reflux over time can lead to repeated damage, and this is known as GERD, or gastroesophageal reflux disease. GERD can then lead to more serious problems such as Barrett esophagus, which in turn can lead to increased risks of cancer. Barrett esophagus is an example of intestinal metaplasia, where normal stratified squamous epithelium is replaced by mostly simple columnar epithelium with lots of goblet cells. It actually tends to look more like the colon than the stomach. On the left, you can see the normal appearance of the esophagus and stomach, while the right panel shows the appearance of the esophagus now resembles the stomach. The bottom panel highlights the large number of goblet cells. These changes are thought to be protective, but under repeated assault and damage, the changes can lead to an unstable epithelium and eventually adenocarcinoma. There are a number of genes now known to be involved in this metaplasia, genes that are normally involved in the cell cycle and in normal cell differentiation. Understanding the mechanisms behind these changes is an ongoing area of research. Unfortunately, it's still unclear which cell or cells initiate this metaplasia.
If you're following this series on the digestive system in order, check out the stomach next. And if you like these videos, please let me know by giving them a thumbs up. Thanks for stopping by.